You know, when we talk about the status of women in Islam, there's often this one single story that comes to mind. But what if there's another history, one that's been kind of forgotten? Today, we're digging into a source that makes a case for a legacy of female sovereignty and dignity, established centuries and centuries ago.
So this brings us to the big question our source is posing. Is it possible that a framework for female sovereignty was actually set up 1400 years ago? I mean, that's a pretty bold claim, right? It really challenges a lot of our modern assumptions.
And here's the core argument. The source says that at a time when other civilizations were literally debating if women even had souls, Islam was establishing them as leaders in finance, in politics, and in scholarship. So how on earth does it build that case?
Okay, first up, let's talk about power, politics, and scholarship. The source kicks things off by going straight at the myth that women were always excluded from the public sphere.
The argument here is that women weren't just sitting in the shadows. Nope, they were active, essential partners in some of the most critical decisions of their time. Let's see what evidence it brings to the table.
What's really interesting are the specific examples given. First, the source points out that women gave their own independent Pledge of Allegiance, which was a huge sign of their political standing. Second, it brings up the story of Salama, whose advice during a major political crisis is said to have saved the day. And third, it talks about Aisha, who was called the professor of her time and was the go-to person for senior leaders on really complex legal matters.
Now, this idea of agency doesn't just stop at politics. It flows right into the economic world. The source introduces this really fascinating concept it calls entitlement without burden, which totally redefines what financial power looks like.
Okay, so here's the deal with this. The principle gives women full financial rights and total independence. But, and this is the really wild part, with absolutely no required obligation to spend a dime on their family. The source presents this as a completely unique system for economic empowerment.
So, how does it work? Well, it's basically built on 3 pillars. First, you've got the dowry. It's not a price for the bride, it's a gift of ownership that is 100% hers. Second, sovereign maintenance. The husband is financially on the hook for the family, even if his wife is a billionaire. And third, inheritance. This was a radical right at a time when women were often treated as property to be inherited.
And when you look at it like this, side by side, it just clicks. Her financial liability is closed. Her money is her own, period. His is open. He's obligated to provide for the family. According to the source, this entire setup is designed to guarantee her complete financial sovereignty.
All right, so from financial agency, the source shifts to personal agency. This next part looks at how the principle of dignity works in marriage, and just as important, what happens when it's time to separate.
The foundation of the whole thing, as it's presented here, is choice. The source is pretty clear. A marriage is straight up invalid without the woman's explicit consent. And get this, she can even annul it if she feels she's just not emotionally ready for it.
Okay, but what happens when a relationship just doesn't work out? The source argues that the system actually provides for dignified exits, making sure a woman's rights and her agency are protected, even when things are falling apart.
2 paths are laid out here. The first is divorce, or talaq, which is all about making sure her financial rights are preserved. But the second one is khul, which is presented as her right to initiate the separation. And the reason for it, in the source's own words, is to make sure no woman lives in emotional humiliation.
So, when you pull all these pieces together, the political power, the financial independence, the personal agency, the source wraps it all up by framing this entire structure as something more. It calls it an authentic honoring of women. This quote really gets to the heart of the argument. The goal isn't about making burdens equal, but about making dignity equal, and then adding what the source calls special protection through these financial and legal frameworks.
And I think the final takeaway is this. The source positions these rights not as some modern reaction to feminist ideas, but as an authentic act that was there from the very beginning of the faith. It's a total reframing of history that kind of asks us to rethink where the whole conversation on women's rights really began.
Now, this whole explainer was based on excerpts from the book, Why the Lifestyle of Islam Always Wins. If you want to explore these ideas in a lot more detail, you can find the book at the website you see on your screen. Thanks so much for digging into this with me.